Welcome back to Secret Weapons, and today we're taking a look at the Strymon Cloudburst. I have something of a confession to make as we get into this video. As some of you may know, the Cloudburst leaked ahead of its release. Some online retailers somewhere accidentally published a listing page with the picture of this and very little other information about it that kind of spread very quickly across the internet. And nobody outside of my Patreon exclusive Discord would probably have seen this from me, but my gut reaction to the leaked information on this was not positive. I saw this as a stripped down, kind of streamlined version of Cloud, which might appeal to some people, but for me, it felt very much like Strymon resting on its laurels in the worst way, a sense of cashing in on a classic, a sound that they knew people would love and would kind of innately sell well with very little in the way of innovation or new engineering or fresh vision. And now, mind you, we didn't know much about it. We basically only had a photo of the control scheme and a very vague understanding of how big it would be based on essentially just kind of like approximating knob sizes and everything. And then Strymon actually released the thing, as they're wont to do. And I sat down and I listened to the day of tech demo release stuff, and my interest was immediately piqued. This isn't just Cloud, as you would know if you saw any of that stuff. They re-engineered the algorithm to, at lower settings, not just be that one big washy ambient setting, but with faster decay. And instead, they have re-engineered it to kind of still hold in its head kind of the classic Cloud sound, but at lower settings, also incorporating this livelier plate and room and hall reverb that is reactive and dynamic and interesting. They also included the ensemble thing, which is the only good take on shimmer style reverb I've ever heard. It's not amazing as a shimmer, in my opinion. I don't like shimmer, and I'm never going to like shimmer, and you can't make me. But the ensemble as its own thing is actually kind of incredible. And to be able to have those massive otherworldly Cloud sounds in an enclosure this big that can take up any tiny piece of real estate on your pedal board with stereo in and stereo out and MIDI is really noteworthy. And it was something that really made me kind of double back on my initial skepticism and my initial kind of disillusion with the concept of Cloudburst. And then I played it, and I have to say, I am a believer. I have made the Big Sky a staple of my pedal board for some time now. I think that the Big Sky by Strymon is something of the world's best utility reverb, in that it is not the single best at any one thing, but it aggregates out to the best reverbs across the board. Nothing in the Big Sky sounds bad. Everything sounds between good and excellent, and there are some standout things in there that are irreplaceable, and the Cloud is obviously one of them. But like I said, there are situations where I want hyper-specific reverbs outside of the Big Sky, and Cloudburst gives me the opportunity to keep that essential, necessary, giant ambient Cloud sound in a much smaller package that frees up pedalboard real estate for me to grab something like the Flint for the 80s reverb, or the plate that I love in that, or the Mercury 7, or the Quiet 3 Prelude. There are so many amazing other reverbs, and stacking two reverbs together has so much value that being able to put this at the end of your signal chain is just so cool. Now, I went from heavy skepticism and potential disappointment to pretty kind of like raucous praise for this thing, going from its kind of initial teasings to playing it in real life. Is it perfect? No, by no stretch. There are things about the original Cloud algorithm that are phenomenally important. There are additional controls you get in something like the Big Sky that you don't get here. And some of them, I understand why they're not here, and some of them I find frustrating. My number one example would be the diffusion rate control in the Big Sky. Being able to control the diffusion on the cloud algorithm is incredibly important in my mind. This doesn't have it. It kind of just operates at that full smoothed version of cloud. And to be fair, that is mostly what people use cloud for. So I understand why in a streamlined package they would go for that. But I do wish that I still had that diffusion control. But again, we're cutting down to less than a quarter of the size of Big Sky and taking the most kind of irreplaceable piece of that, and the version of it they've implemented here is phenomenally good. And those low decay kind of room sounds are a completely different animal than anything you could ever get from the traditional cloud reverb sound. And again, we need to talk a little bit more about that ensemble mode before we get into our sound samples, because like I said, blending it in, it's great. Some people are gonna love it. People who like shimmer reverb will like that ensemble mode mixed in with their dry signal. For me, it is an all wet, all the time kind of affair. Ensemble in this is not just an octave up for the uninitiated. It is a very synthetic sounding string accompaniment. It is basically an orchestra synthesized and made to kind of emulate your guitar's input signal. And it is incredibly reactive to both your playing dynamics and, more specifically, this tone control. For my money, all the best sounds exist between tone completely off and like maybe 10 o'clock. Above that, it gets a little too Blade Runner minus subtlety, if that's a fair way to say it. It gets a little too digital, but at low settings, it is shockingly subtle and robust and organic sounding. On that intro track, you heard synthetic strings in this being augmented with string library kind of sample packs that I used for scoring. And this provided an amazing bedrock for that. Being able to use this to kind of map out string accompaniments and to map out kind of like synthy pad-based guitar parts and string parts. This thing sounds so good if you dial it right. You could leave it as its own thing. It's really good. Again, you can use it as a traditional kind of shimmer octave up and or octave down thing, but as its own thing is where it's really unique and where I think Cloudburst really becomes a formidable player in the high capacity, small footprint reverb game. You have access to great room sounds, the classic giant cloud reverb algorithms, and a weirdly good string engine. So we're gonna get into some sound samples now. We're gonna take a look at the kind of like wealth of reverb sounds in this tiny little box. We're gonna really dig into those really amazing ensemble mode options. And I'm gonna eat my words, I think. So before we get into our sound samples, let's go ahead and talk through our signal chain and the context I am working in. I am playing my Jennings Voyager with McNelly Chaplin pickups into the Benson Germanium Boost and Bondi Sick As set as kind of a clean boost. We're going to be running the Cloudburst in stereo, and our amplifiers are going to be the Universal Audio Dream and Ruby in a stereo pair in the GFI duophony. The Germanium Boost, Sick As, and amplifiers sound like this. We're going to start things off with the Cloudburst with Decay and Mix at Noon, Predelay all the way down, tone all the way up, and modulation off. We're going to start by taking a look at the Decay range of this reverb before getting into our lower run of controls, and then we will finish things off by taking a look at that ensemble control. And like I said, what I think is so compelling is how this reverb morphs as you kind of move through the Decay range. So let's start off with Decay at noon. And what's fascinating about the decay on this thing is you can hear kind of where the morph changes from the kind of new DSP for like the hall/room reverbs into kind of that classic cloud. And you can tell where the delineation is based on the way that moving that decay knob changes. So kind of south of 1 o'clock, you're going to hear a very kind of like classic speed change when you adjust the decay, and then above that point, once you're fully into cloud, you will lose that and just get a very like natural extension of your decay times. You can hear that kind of character change a little bit as you enter into that. But then from that point on, it becomes very distinctly cloud. All the way on to kind of like infinite reverb. So at short settings, you have a very splashy, almost like tile room kind of vibe. And it quickly morphs into something of a little bit more of a kind of almost hall sound, but like a very like bright, lively hall. And you can get a lot of range. You hear that like long decay lines out of this. And then into those cloud mode reverbs. And what's nice is across that board, you've got a very kind of like even and well-balanced mix control, which is really wonderful. do find that some ambient reverbs can get a little bit too haphazard with how quickly they bring in the wet control. And the mix on this is really well balanced. Like just south of noon should always feel wonderful. And when you start bringing in your pre-delay and your tone control, this is a great place to have a washy reverb, which is awesome. And of course, you can get up to that full wet place. And again, like I said, that tone control is deeply helpful, especially like for these like lower, kind of very like splashy room settings. I personally am a big fan of like longer decay lines, higher mixes, and darker reverbs. Like I know some people might be bigger fans of bright reverb and like a low mix, like this kind of thing. I'm a big fan of crank that reverb a little bit higher and turn that tone control down. And part of that is because I like that darker reverbs don't eat up my delay as much. And in that same vein of the tone control being high value, this pre-delay is also really, really helpful for kind of like fine-tuning exactly what you need. And you have a ton of pre-delay on tap here. Told you, there's a lot of it. Like to the point where you can almost get a faux delay out of it. I mean, this is how much pre-delay you have on this thing. It's kind of insane. Yeah, it's a great pre-delay control. You have a ton of space on it. And like I said, it goes a long way for giving you exactly what control you need over that pre-delay and that tone as kind of two parts of taming a big reverb. And lastly, we have that modulation control, which is pretty wonderful for being a single band modulation control, but that's also accurate to the Bigsky. This is where you get your kind of like organic feel back into something like the Cloud. You take that modulation all the way out, and you're stuck with this very kind of like static, synthetic thing, but there's a great organic feel to the modulation in this. The rate gets fast, but the depth never gets comical, which I find to be very, very helpful. And again, all these tools come together. Relatively simple reverb for some great sounds. Especially when you throw like a reverse delay in front of it. Super versatile, very simple. It's a great combination. Let's wrap things up by taking a look at our ensemble modes. We'll start short, modulation all the way down. We'll bring it back in, and we'll kind of like roll that tone back and forth as we go. Like I said, there is, I guess, in the interest of clarity, we'll kind of showcase it a little bit really quickly as a shimmer reverb. So let's jump into that really quick, but it's going to be brief because I think it's way more interesting as its own standalone effect. Like I said, that's all well and good if you're into that kind of shimmer thing, and it's a unique and refreshing take on shimmer reverb, to be sure. However, let's take mix to max, pre-delay out, our tone all the way up, and our modulation down, and let's really kind of like explore this. So you're going to have MP and forte. MP is mezzo something or other. I was bad at music theory, so I don't know it. But MP is basically an octave up. So you've got and then forte is going to be octave down and octave up. And that may not sound super compelling. Even as a like doubling effect, which is kind of cool. But there's a couple tricks. That decay still matters, which is huge. But what matters a lot more is this tone control. Let's take that tone down and let's roll the tone back on my guitar. So my guitar from this to this. And now let's give a listen to the difference between tone all the way up This is a sound I love with a reverb after it. So let's put the 80s mode after it. And again, a little bit of pre-delay and just a little bit of modulation takes that and really opens it up.